You ever open a door and feel the rest of your life shift behind it? That's how I met Nadine. Right there, front of the server room, tangled in a mess of Ethernet cables and a dress so red it looked illegal under fluorescent lights. The irony? I was just trying to fix a faulty router. Instead, I tripped into something way more complex. Something beautiful, wild, and eventually, catastrophic. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At the time, I was a 24-year-old software developer with a caffeine addiction and the social grace of a damp keyboard. I worked for a scrappy tech startup that smelled like old pizza and ambition. We were buried in code and deadlines, but I didn't mind. I had the magic, lines of logic danced for me. I could make things work that other people gave up on. I'd never really been good at relationships, but I could build an AI that wrote poetry or debug a system meltdown in the time it took someone to microwave noodles. So when the CEO announced we were getting a new branding consultant to help us polish our image, I didn't care. Until she walked in. Nadine. 30 seconds late, hair swept into a casual twist like she didn't care about time, or maybe she owned it. Her voice, warm, confident, slightly amused, cut through the hum of monitors and cheap office banter like a melody in a server room. She was there to refine our visual identity, whatever that meant, but all I heard was the part where she'd be working closely with each department. Including mine. From day one, she had this way of looking at me. Like I wasn't just a guy in cargo pants and a hoodie who drank too much Red Bull and talked to himself while writing code. She actually listened when I explained how the UI flow worked. She asked questions. Smart ones. And laughed at my terrible jokes. You don't understand, women didn't usually laugh at my jokes. They winced, maybe smiled politely, then escaped as fast as possible. But Nadine. She leaned in. I told myself it was just friendly. She was just nice. It was her job to be engaging. But then came the night we stayed late, troubleshooting a product demo disaster. Everyone else had left. It was raining outside. The office felt smaller, quieter. She handed me coffee, still hot, and said, "You know, Andrew, you're kind of brilliant." In an unassuming, quietly genius kind of way. I think I forgot how to breathe for a second. My hands shook so bad I almost dropped the mug. That was the first time I caught her watching me when I wasn't looking. Or maybe the first time I let myself believe it. Still, I didn't act on it. I didn't even dare. She was beautiful, polished, confident, the kind of woman who'd been to Europe and knew how to order wine without pointing at the menu. I was the guy who lived alone with 2 monitors and a rice cooker. But something was happening. I felt it in the way she touched my shoulder when she passed behind me. The way she lingered at my desk longer than she needed to. The way she started sending me memes during meetings, inside jokes only we got. I started looking forward to her texts. I stayed later at work. I even shaved more often. Then one evening, as we walked to the parking lot, she turned to me and asked, "Why haven't you asked me out yet?" Just like that. No warning. Like it was the most casual thing in the world. I stared at her, open-mouthed, probably looking like a malfunctioning chatbot. "I didn't think you were, you're," she smirked. "Intimidating? Out of your league?" I nodded, swallowing hard. She laughed. "You might be surprised what league I actually want to be in. It should have been a dream come true. And maybe it was, for a while. But that night, something shifted in me. A spark of joy, yes. But also a whisper I couldn't quite shake, something in her tone, in that little smirk she gave me. Like she already knew how this story would end. Like she played this game before. And yet, I followed her. Eyes wide open. They say love makes you reckless. I used to roll my eyes at that, but then I married Nadine 6 months after our first real kiss. It wasn't even planned. We were walking past a little courthouse near the coffee shop where we always met after work, and she looked at me, squeezed my hand, and said, "Let's not wait." That was it. No elaborate proposal, no ring with a fancy gemstone, just a shared look and a courthouse clerk who kept glancing at the clock like he had better things to do. I signed the papers with a pen that barely worked. She signed with a flourish, like she was painting something grand and permanent. And just like that, we were husband and wife. I thought it would feel different. Heavier. But it was almost suspiciously easy. Like installing an app you're not sure you need but that immediately starts running in the background, changing things quietly. The first few weeks were a blur of excitement, shared toothbrushes, burnt dinners, mismatched furniture, and laughter that never seemed to run out. Nadine danced in the kitchen barefoot. She played music too loud. She left her jackets on every chair like she was marking territory. I didn't care. I loved every chaotic second. And then, against all odds, we found a house. A real one. With a yard and a squeaky gate and more character than square footage. It wasn't in the best neighborhood. The porch sagged a little, the roof had some complaints about age, and the wallpaper in the bathroom was an insult to the concept of taste. But it was ours. We scraped together a down payment, got approved for a mortgage that made my stomach twist, and signed yet another stack of papers. I remember gripping the pen tighter this time. Maybe because this commitment felt more permanent than the wedding did. You can end a marriage with signatures and tears, but a mortgage, that thing follows you like a loyal dog with sharp teeth. Still, the day we moved in, the sky was clear, and Nadine twirled on the front lawn like we'd just conquered the world. I had a box of cables in one hand and a toaster in the other, and she yelled, "We're homeowners," like we'd just bought the moon. The first night we slept there, I couldn't stop listening to the creaks and groans of the old house. Every pop in the wall felt like a voice from the past. Nadine, of course, slept like a rock, curled up in our mattress on the floor like she'd lived there forever. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was the part where life steadied out. But that feeling, the calm after the climb, never came. Instead, I started noticing little things. Nothing big. Just friction. She started locking the bathroom door, which she never used to. Her phone, once left carelessly on every counter, now lived in her back pocket or under her pillow. She said it was because she was working with new clients and needed to stay organized. I believed her, because I wanted to. I wanted to believe that we were still in the honeymoon phase, just with bills and drafty windows and arguments about which way the toilet paper should hang. But something in me, that old, quiet internal narrator I used to use for debugging code, whispered otherwise. Still, I pushed that voice down and told myself to be grateful. We had a home, we had each other, and we had dreams. She talked about remodeling the kitchen. I talked about building a little home office in the back. We made plans. Lots of them. But slowly, subtly, I started to notice that most of those plans came from me. Nadine smiled and nodded, but sometimes I'd catch her zoning out mid-sentence. Like her mind was elsewhere. Like she was already halfway out the door. And that's when I first started feeling it. Not fear. Not even jealousy. Just the kind of quiet, creeping realization that maybe I had fallen in love faster than she had. Maybe I had jumped into the deep end while she was still testing the temperature. But even then, I didn't let myself fully believe it. After all, we had a house. And who builds a home with someone they don't plan to stay with? It started with a small win, a quiet email on a Thursday that she barely mentioned at first, just a little smile and a casual, "Guess who got promoted?" while she made coffee like she hadn't just shifted the entire rhythm of our life. I remember staring at her, holding a spoon midair, feeling this odd mixture of pride and unease bubble up in my chest. Of course, I told her I was proud. And I was. She'd worked hard, stayed late, navigated meetings with people who used words like synergy without irony. She deserved it. I told myself that over and over. When her boss started inviting her to those marketing retreats and strategy sessions in other cities, I convinced myself that was part of the role. It was natural. She was talented. The team needed her. She needed the experience. I said all of this out loud to my reflection one morning, adjusting my collar while she packed a sleek little overnight bag behind me. I remember she wore a navy blazer I'd never seen before, sharp and crisp, and when I asked about it, she said the company gave her a stipend for travel clothes. I laughed, made a joke about joining a fashion cult, but something about how neatly she folded that blazer unsettled me. Like she'd done it many times before. The first trip was to Chicago. 2 nights. She texted when she landed, sent me a picture of the view from her hotel room. Lake Michigan sparkling behind glass. She sounded upbeat. Professional. But I noticed she didn't call that night. I told myself she was tired, probably had meetings. The second trip was San Diego. Then Atlanta. Then Denver. They came fast, each with less warning than the last. Sometimes I'd only know she was flying out when I saw her suitcase by the door. She'd kiss me on the cheek, call me, my sweet man, and tell me to keep the house from falling apart. I'd chuckle, tell her to enjoy the minibar. And then I'd stand by the window and watch the cab drive her away, trying not to let the quiet dig its claws into me. I started filling the silence with tasks. Reorganizing code I'd already optimized, rewriting features just to keep my mind busy. I even cleaned the garage, and I hate the garage. Anything to avoid the stillness that came when the house stopped echoing her footsteps. But every time I started to feel the chill of doubt, I pushed it back with logic. This was just a job. Promotions come with responsibility. Travel is standard for consultants. Her boss, Alan, was married, older, and had that, I do yoga and talk about trust falls, vibe. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't even that interesting. She talked about him like he was part of the wallpaper, necessary, unremarkable. But I'm not an idiot. I noticed things. Her wardrobe subtly changed. Blazers replaced cardigans. Blouses with precise collars, heels that made a different kind of sound on the tile. Her texts became shorter. She smiled less. I told myself she was tired. Travel wears people down. Maybe I just missed her too much. Maybe I was making mountains out of airport layovers. But then came the trip where she didn't tell me at all. I came home one Friday expecting her to be there, lights on, music playing, that smell of something slightly burnt coming from the kitchen. Instead, silence. A note on the fridge, off to Boston, emergency meeting. Back Sunday. No call, no heads up, just a line of neat handwriting and a fridge full of food she hadn't touched. I sat at the table and read that note 4 times. My hands felt cold. Still, I made excuses. Maybe the trip came up last minute. Maybe her phone died. Maybe this is what success looks like. People always say be proud when your partner climbs higher, but no one tells you how to handle it when you feel like you're standing still while they take off. I wanted to believe we were still in sync. That this was just a phase. That Nadine was the same woman who danced barefoot in our kitchen and made me laugh with bad impressions of corporate jargon. But that woman was now in a different time zone. And I was here, watching the clock, pretending the silence didn't bother me. Because it was just a job. It had to be. It was a Tuesday, not that it matters much, but I remember because Tuesdays were the quiet days, the days nothing ever happened. I stayed late at the office finishing a back-end deployment that no one would notice if it went well but everyone would curse if it didn't. I walked out of the building feeling accomplished and a little numb, the kind of tired where your bones feel like they've been simmering all day. The sun was already low, the sky streaked with that pale pink haze that always makes the world feel more honest than it really is. I took the long route home, past the bakery even though it was closed, let my mind drift to what Nadine might be cooking, if she was home at all. Lately, her presence was like the wind. Sometimes strong, sometimes absent, always changing direction. I turned onto our street, familiar cracks in the pavement, the usual rows of houses with porches that all had a story. That's when I saw it. From about half a block away, our driveway barely in view, a sleek black SUV pulled up, tinted windows, custom rims, the kind of car you lease if you want the world to know you're doing better than it is. It idled for a second, long enough for me to slow my steps without realizing it, and then the passenger door opened. Nadine stepped out. Her heels touched the pavement with practiced ease. She adjusted her blazer, smoothed her hair, and leaned into the window, too close for a casual goodbye, too long for a professional one. I couldn't see the driver's face. Just the vague outline of a man. Broad shoulders. Confident posture. She said something I couldn't hear. He nodded. The window rolled up, the engine hummed a little louder, and the SUV drifted away like a well-timed scene in a movie. I stood there, halfway behind the neighbor's hedge, heart thudding against my ribs like it was trying to tell me something I didn't want to hear. Nadine didn't see me. She turned toward the house with her usual grace, the kind that used to make me feel lucky, and walked inside as if it had been any other ride, any other day. I waited a full minute before moving. My feet felt rooted, not out of fear, but something more hollow. Disbelief, maybe. I walked the rest of the way trying to pretend I hadn't seen it, trying to rehearse what I'd say if she asked why I was late, trying not to let my thoughts spiral into the kind of stories that end with broken things. The front door was unlocked. She was in the kitchen, humming softly, pouring herself a glass of water like nothing unusual had happened. I said hello. She smiled. Told me she'd just gotten back from a long meeting. Her voice didn't tremble. Mine did. I told her the deployment had gone well, that I grabbed a snack on the way home, that I was tired. Every word felt like a brick, and I stacked them carefully, building a wall between what I saw and what I said. Because I didn't ask. Not then. Not yet. Because a part of me still wanted it to mean nothing. Maybe it was Alan, her boss, dropping her off after a late strategy dinner. Maybe it was someone from her team, just being helpful. Maybe this was what normal looked like in a life where promotions meant partnerships and partners had expensive cars. I told myself that a dozen times while brushing my teeth that night. But the image kept playing on a loop behind my eyes. Her leaning into the window. The car pulling away like it knew exactly where it was going. And me, watching it all from the shadows, pretending the world hadn't just tilted slightly off its axis. Sleep didn't visit me that night. It hovered like a taunt, just out of reach, as if mocking me for thinking I could rest with that image still playing in my head. Nadine's face leaning into that window, the shape of that man behind the wheel, the way she walked inside like nothing had shifted. But everything had shifted. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the old fan blade slicing the shadows into pieces, and something cold and unfamiliar settled in my chest. I knew that feeling. It wasn't heartbreak. It was calculation. It was the part of me that knew how to take broken code and bend it until it worked again. Only this time, the code was my life, and the error wasn't in the syntax. It was in the trust. The next morning I left early under the excuse of needing to double-check the deployment, but I didn't go to the office. I went to a coffee shop across town with good Wi-Fi and terrible lighting. I set up in a corner booth and opened my laptop like I was going to war. Over the years I'd built a toolbox of software, little utilities I'd written during long nights of boredom and curiosity, and now I finally had a reason to use them. I started with metadata. Image files she'd sent me from trips. Timestamps, GPS data, inconsistencies in the file history. She'd once sent a photo from a client dinner in Chicago. But the coordinates put her in a small coastal town in Oregon, 300 miles from the nearest client on her company's list. I moved to her calendar, synced through our shared family planner, and cross-referenced every trip with flight manifests and hotel check-ins pulled through an API I shouldn't have had access to. It was shockingly easy. Most people don't think about how much they leave open. Within a few hours, I had a full map. Not just where she had been, but with whom. Because buried in her calendar entries were names, initials, shared events that always seemed to include one person. Alan. Her boss. The same Alan who shook my hand at the company picnic and complimented the ribs I'd grilled. The same Alan who once told me I was the kind of developer companies fight over. I stared at the screen and felt something go still in me. This wasn't just some faceless stranger with a rental car and a forgettable name. This was her boss. My boss. The man who had the power to shape her career. The man who had the power to ruin mine. I found emails. Not the content, not yet, but the headers. Patterns. Their messages increased in frequency right before every business trip. I tracked the IP addresses. Hotel Wi-Fi. Private servers. Anonymous services that weren't as anonymous as they thought. I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I had confirmation. I had the architecture of their deception. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because this wasn't about emotion anymore. It wasn't about feeling hurt or betrayed. It was about control. I began outlining everything. I opened a new code repository and labeled it Project Sandcastle. Because that's what they'd built, a fragile, temporary thing, beautiful until the tide came in. My plan started with information. Screenshots. Logs. Every traceable detail of their meetings, flights, dinners, and check-ins. I backed it all up to 3 separate cloud services, encrypted under keys I didn't even write down. Then I wrote a script that would trigger automatic sends to their board of directors if anything happened to me or my access. From there, I moved to reputation. Alan had a wife. 2 kids in private school. A clean image, polished LinkedIn, articles about his leadership style. I gathered every public thread and started laying groundwork for leaks. Anonymous tips. Quiet emails. Scheduled posts that I could activate remotely. For Nadine, it would be slower. Not revenge. Just consequences. I found her presentation drafts and inserted subtle but critical errors. Ones that would cause failure without appearing deliberate. I mapped out a timeline, a cascade. Alan loses his image. Nadine loses her foothold. And I remain exactly where I am, calm and smiling, the quiet man in the hoodie who just keeps showing up to work. I never wanted to destroy anyone. But they made the mistake of thinking I wouldn't notice. And then they made the bigger mistake of thinking I wouldn't do anything. But I build systems. I understand pressure points. And the difference between a stable program and a collapsing one is usually just a single line of code. I found that line. And now I know exactly where to cut. I didn't rush it. That's the difference between a tantrum and a strategy. Most people, when they get hurt, they explode. They yell, throw things, demand attention, and burn themselves to ash in the process. But I wasn't interested in fire. I wanted quiet erosion, the kind that looks like coincidence to everyone else. I started with the infrastructure. Every company has weaknesses buried beneath the marketing gloss, and ours was no different. The codebase was bloated, legacy systems patched together with duct tape and desperation. I knew every flaw because I'd spent the last 2 years cleaning them up. All I had to do was stop cleaning. Stop fixing. Stop warning people. I began introducing small inefficiencies, subtle database errors, misaligned dependencies, delay triggers buried so deep they looked like normal lag. The kind of issues that pile up until clients start asking why things are running slower, why the numbers don't match, why the system crashes during high load. I watched as the support team struggled, the sales team got nervous, and Alan, dear Alan, started sending frantic emails about performance bottlenecks. I answered them all with a calm professionalism that made me want to laugh. Then I set up an internal audit script. Made it look like an automated compliance tool, something from HR, but it quietly pulled every confidential document Alan had stored in his personal drive. Expense reports, private communications, travel logs. Including ones that made it unmistakably clear that company funds had been used for more than just business dinners. Hotel stays. Flights marked as client meetings that were, in reality, trysts in cities where no clients lived. I compiled it all into a neat folder labeled Executive Misconduct. Then I waited. It took 3 months. Just enough time for the board to grow restless, for revenue to dip, for an emergency meeting to be called. And when it did, I sent everything, not to the board, not directly. That would have made me a suspect. I sent it anonymously to a journalist I'd researched carefully, someone with a reputation for exposing white-collar hypocrisy. The article dropped like a piano in a library. Alan's name plastered across every headline. CEO embroiled in scandal. Accusations of fund misuse. Affair with subordinate. Images of him and Nadine together at what was supposedly a leadership summit, now exposed as a weekend getaway billed to the company card. Investors pulled out within days. Clients terminated contracts. Within a week, the stock tanked. And the board, in its infinite panic, cleaned house. Alan was ousted, his accounts frozen pending investigation, his name scrubbed from the website as if he never existed. His wife left him publicly and efficiently, releasing a carefully worded statement about betrayal and integrity. She kept the house. He kept the humiliation. I watched it all unfold from my desk, sipping coffee like it was any other day. No one suspected a thing. Why would they? I was the quiet one. The reliable one. Just another faceless developer with tired eyes and clean commits. Nadine didn't get fired, not right away. But once the media caught wind of her involvement, her emails stopped being returned, her meetings got cancelled, and she was quietly offered a resignation package that read like mercy on paper but felt like exile. I saw her once more, passing by my desk, eyes hollow, face pale under the fluorescent lights. She didn't even look at me. Maybe she didn't want to. Or maybe she couldn't. I don't know. I didn't speak to her. I just waited for the office to clear out one evening, the way it always did, slow and lazy like a tide going out. And then I placed a card on her now empty desk. No return address. No signature. Just one sentence written in simple ink. You should have picked someone who didn't know how to rebuild systems from the inside. I left before the cleaning crew arrived. Walked out with nothing but my laptop and a calm heart. No fanfare. No farewell party. Just silence and satisfaction. Because some people need closure. Me. I just needed the code to run exactly the way I wrote it.